It should never have happened. She should have never have been allowed to walk free. She should have done some time.
Bryn Spetcher stabbed a man she'd been dating more than 100 times, killing him. She claimed she was suffering from cannabis-induced psychosis. The man she killed was Chad O'Melia. His dad is here to tell us more about him and what he thought of Spetcher's trial.
He was born into sunlight and sea air, the kind of California morning that glowed over the low hills of San Fernando Valley, all gold and promise. Chad O'Melia came into the world in 2000, a year that seemed to belong to the young. His mother, Megan, remembered him as a quiet baby who would fix his eyes on her as though memorizing every movement. His father wasn't always around. Construction work took him north for months at a time, but Chad never complained. He learned early how to fill silence with imagination. As a child, he was the sort who built whole cities from Legos and then pulled them apart to start again, fascinated by how things worked, how they broke, and how they could be made better. His teachers called him gentle, a little absent-minded, the kind of boy who could spend an entire recess staring at clouds and still know exactly when the bell would ring. By high school, that innocence was already thinning around the edges. Los Angeles had a way of growing up its kids too fast. Phones became mirrors for validation, and Chad, curious, introspective, lonely in ways he didn't yet have language for, found online spaces that seemed to promise understanding. He was 17 when he began using small, anonymous apps, forums where people his age, or people who claimed to be, traded jokes, advice, and sometimes photos that should never have been shared. It started as harmless talk about music and skateboards. It didn't stay harmless long. Friends later told investigators that Chad changed sometime in the middle of senior year. He grew quieter, more withdrawn, sleeping through classes, showing up to school with eyes rimmed in red. He told one friend he felt watched, that someone online knew things about him, but he never explained who or what. His mother noticed the way he flinched at text notifications, the way he kept his phone face down on the table during dinner. What no one could see was the slow tightening of a digital noose. Somewhere behind an anonymous username, someone was manipulating him, threatening to leak photos, to humiliate him, to expose him to his classmates. The messages alternated between affection and cruelty. Whoever it was, they knew how to keep him terrified and compliant. For months, Chad tried to handle it alone. He deleted accounts, changed phones, and lied when his mother asked why he seemed so tired. There were good days, 2 skate sessions in Burbank, coffee with his best friend Alex, plans to study film at community college. Chad loved stories, loved the idea that you could freeze a moment and make sense of it through a lens. He talked about saving for a used Canon camera, shooting short films about growing up in a city that never slept. But the darker parts of his online life kept dragging him back. One Saturday night in early 2018, his mother found him pacing in the driveway, hoodie pulled up, phone in hand. "It's just someone messing with me," he told her, when she pressed. "It's fine." She could tell it wasn't. She wanted to believe it would pass. In hindsight, she would replay that moment endlessly. The flicker of fear in his voice, the way he kept glancing toward the street as if expecting someone to appear. The last week of his life unfolded like a slow-motion dream. He left home early for school, stayed out late, missed curfew twice. On April 3rd, he sent Alex a short message, "Weird stuff going on, bro, can't explain," and then went silent. When he failed to come home that night, Megan assumed he'd crashed at a friend's place. By morning, his bed was still empty, his phone going straight to voicemail. She called the police that afternoon. The next 48 hours would carve themselves into her memory like glass. Officers filed a missing person report but offered little hope. Teenagers vanished and reappeared every day. Megan printed flyers anyway, walked the strip malls and parks, begged anyone who'd listen to help find her son. A few classmates said they'd seen him near the Glendale Galleria. Another thought she spotted him talking to someone in a dark sedan by the freeway. None of it led anywhere. 3 days later, a hiker discovered a body near the shoulder of the 210 freeway, sprawled in a dry patch of grass behind a guardrail. It was Chad. The news traveled through the valley like a thunderclap. His mother collapsed on the kitchen floor when detectives arrived. The coroner ruled it suspicious. There were traces of narcotics in his system, bruising on his neck inconsistent with a simple overdose, and his phone when recovered showed a series of frantic messages in the hours before he died. Someone had lured him out. Someone had made sure he didn't come back. For the next months, the investigation unfolded in fragments. Police traced the anonymous accounts linked to the threats, They led to an older man with prior charges involving minors, part of a network using social media apps to extort teenagers for explicit material. Chad, it turned out, had been one of many blackmailed, humiliated, and finally silenced, but long before the arrest, before headlines and vigils. There was only a mother standing in her son's room, staring at the half-finished storyboard taped to the wall. "Film ideas," it said at the top. Beside it, in careful handwriting, Chad had written, "Find beauty even in broken things." That line became his memorial. His friends printed it on t-shirts, painted it on skateboards, and shared it online with his photo. It was how they kept him alive, by remembering the way he saw the world, even as the world failed him. When the sun rose over the valley the morning after Chad was found, the world looked almost indecently ordinary. Commuters still filled the freeways, the radio still played the same pop songs, and somewhere a child's laughter echoed from a schoolyard. Yet in Megan Amelia's house everything had turned to static. The police tape that stretched across her driveway might as well have wrapped around her heart. Detectives from the Glendale Police Department arrived before dawn to gather details, last contacts, phone numbers, social media accounts. They carried tablets and neutral expressions, the kind worn by people who must separate empathy from efficiency. Megan handed over Chad's laptop with trembling hands. "He was scared," she whispered. "Someone was hurting him online." The officer nodded, taking notes, but she could see he didn't yet understand the world her son had fallen into, a place where cruelty hid behind profile pictures and usernames that vanished overnight. The coroner's report arrived 2 weeks later. Cause of death: acute fentanyl toxicity. Manner: undetermined. But the bruising on Chad's neck, the abrasions on his wrists, the half-erased messages on his phone told a story more complex than a simple overdose. Megan refused to accept that her son had willingly taken anything. "He hated pills," she kept repeating. "He couldn't even swallow vitamins." Detectives traced the last calls from his phone to a prepaid number registered under a false name. The digital trail led them to messaging apps notorious for encrypted conversations, places where predators prowled for victims too young or too trusting to see the danger. One handle appeared again and again, venomous to one. The messages alternated between flirtation and threats, promising to delete compromising photos if Chad would meet just once more. The final exchange, sent the night he disappeared, read simply, "Come alone. This ends tonight." The detectives requested records from the app companies, but subpoenas crawled through legal red tape. In the meantime, they pieced together the story from fragments, screenshots found on Chad's cloud backup, testimonies from other teens who had been approached by the same user, and a string of IP addresses bouncing between cheap motels across Los Angeles County. The man behind the screen name was eventually identified as Ryan Peters, 34, previously arrested for solicitation of minors and released on probation. He had reinvented himself online, posing as a teenager, gathering private images, then extorting silence with the threat of exposure. When investigators raided his North Hollywood apartment, they found a laptop packed with folders labeled by first names, hundreds of them each containing photographs, conversations, and digital trophies. Chad's folder was the largest. The arrest made local news for a single evening before being eclipsed by other tragedies. But in Megan's world it was an earthquake. She attended every court hearing, her eyes fixed on the man in handcuffs who never once looked back. Reporters described her as composed. In truth, she was holding herself together by instinct alone. "He doesn't get to look away," she told one journalist. "He saw my son as data. I want him to see a mother." While the legal case crept forward, another battle raged in the background: the war for Chad's memory. Online, strangers dissected his death as if it were a mystery podcast. Some blamed him for trusting the wrong person. Others romanticized his tragedy into cautionary hashtags. Megan tried to ignore them, but each new headline felt like another theft. Another piece of him taken. Alex, Chad's best friend, started filming short clips about online exploitation, uploading them to TikTok and YouTube under the tag #ForChad. The first video, just him holding a skateboard beside a candlelit photo, was raw and unedited. He thought he could fix it himself, Alex said to the camera. He thought the person threatening him would get bored and move on. But predators don't get bored. They get braver. The clip went viral overnight. Schools invited him to speak. Parents began calling, desperate to know how to protect their kids. For the first time, Chad's story felt like more than grief. It was a warning. Yet beneath the activism, the investigation deepened into something uglier. detectives discovered that Ryan Peters hadn't been working alone. There were encrypted transfers, shared drives, and payment logs leading overseas. The network operated like a marketplace of secrets, photos traded for cryptocurrency, victims cataloged by age and location. Chad's case cracked open one doorway, but behind it lay corridors without end. Federal agents joined in, tracing IPs to Eastern Europe and Southeast Asia. The operation was named Project Sunset, an ironic nod to the California glow that hid the darkness underneath. In court, the evidence against Peters was overwhelming. The messages recovered from his laptop, cross-referenced with Chad's phone, told the whole arc. Months of grooming, escalating threats, and a final meeting arranged in a parking lot near the freeway. Surveillance cameras caught a car matching Peters leaving the area at 2:13 a.m., minutes before Chad's phone went dark. During interrogation, Peters insisted he dropped the boy off alive. He wanted drugs. I didn't force him, he said, his tone detached as though describing a stranger. The jury didn't believe him. In 2020, he was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, child exploitation, and distribution of controlled substances. The sentence, 35 years, felt both immense and insufficient. Megan sat through the verdict with her hands clenched so tightly her nails drew blood. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked if she felt justice had been served. Justice, she murmured. Justice would be my son coming home. After the trial, life didn't return to normal. How could it? Her house remained a museum of paused time, his sneakers by the door, his sketchbook open on the desk. She joined a support group for parents of exploited teens, meeting others whose children had been targeted through the same apps. Together they lobbied for stricter online safety laws, pressing tech companies to create faster reporting channels for coercion and sextortion. Some officials listened. Most gave polite nods and moved on. But stories like Chad's have a way of echoing long after the news cycle ends. 2 years later, a documentary crew contacted Megan. They wanted to tell his story truthfully, compassionately, with names and faces that could not be forgotten. She hesitated. You'll make people pity him, she said. He doesn't need pity. He needs people to see what this world did to him. The director promised honesty, not sentimentality. She agreed, and the cameras rolled. During filming, they visited the stretch of freeway where he'd been found. The grass had grown back, green against the asphalt. Traffic roared past like a river of ghosts. Megan knelt and pressed her palm to the earth. He was just a kid, she whispered. Just a kid who thought he could trust someone. When the documentary aired, viewers across the country saw not just a crime but a pattern, a generation living online, exposed to predators older than their parents but cloaked in teenage slang. Schools began screening the film in digital literacy classes. Hotlines reported a spike in calls from teens seeking help. For Megan, each call meant another boy or girl might be saved. That was enough reason to keep speaking. Yet at night, when the house fell silent, she would still open Chad's old phone, its cracked screen frozen on a photo of the two of them at the beach. The ocean stretched wide behind them, infinite and calm. He was laughing, hair plastered by wind, unaware of how little time he had left. In the years that followed the trial, Los Angeles seemed to move on, but Megan Amelia never did. Grief had a way of settling into the corners of her life like dust, quiet, persistent, impossible to clean completely. She still worked her part-time job at the preschool, still smiled for the parents at drop-off, but her eyes had a distance to them now. Every child she met reminded her of what she'd lost, and what the world could so easily take. Project Sunset grew from a local investigation into a federal task force spanning 6 states. Chad's name appeared in the earliest files, a catalyst that forced law enforcement to confront what they had long overlooked: the industrial scale of digital exploitation. Agents began cross-referencing usernames, tracking cryptocurrency trails, mapping entire ecosystems of coercion built in the shadows of social media giants. For every account they shut down, 2 more seemed to appear, born in seconds, vanishing in minutes. One evening, 2 detectives visited Megan's home again. They brought updates and an apology. More arrests were coming, they said, dozens of them, but it would take years to unwind the full network. Your son helped us start something, one officer told her. His case opened doors we didn't even know were there. It was meant to comfort her. Instead, it broke her heart anew. Because it meant there were others. Dozens, maybe hundreds of others like Chad, kids who thought they were chatting with a friend. A girlfriend. Someone who understood them. Until the messages turned into chains. Meanwhile, the documentary about Chad's life had reached millions of viewers. Teachers began using it in classrooms. Advocacy groups quoted Megan's interviews in their campaigns. She received letters from strangers across the country, parents, teenagers, survivors thanking her for speaking up. Some enclosed photos of their own children. One, from a mother in Ohio, read, "My son told me about a man who was threatening him online. We called the police because of you. I think you saved his life." Megan kept that letter framed above her desk. Still, for all the awareness and headlines, the world online hardly changed. Apps promised safety features, moderation, and new report abuse buttons, but predators were always a step ahead. They migrated to smaller, encrypted platforms, trading secrets in digital darkrooms where algorithms couldn't reach. One journalist writing about Project Sunset described it as a hydra cut off one head and to more appear. Alex, now 20, enrolled in a community college film program just as Chad once planned to. He carried his friend's dream forward with stubborn devotion. His short film, Ghost in the Feed, told the story of a boy haunted by a digital doppelganger who threatened to destroy him. It was raw and furious, shot in handheld grain and late-night neon. When it screened at a local festival, Megan sat in the back row, hands pressed to her heart as Chad's voice echoed through Alex's dialogue. After the credits rolled, she found him outside under the theater marquee. Neither of them spoke for a long time. When they finally did, she said, "You gave him back to me for a little while." The quiet after justice was strange. There were no more court dates, no more reporters at her door. Just silence and the everyday ghosts that followed her through grocery aisles and traffic lights. Some nights, she would drive the same route to the freeway shoulder where he had been found. She never got out of the car. She didn't need to. She just parked, turned off the engine, and let the noise of passing cars drown her thoughts. She said it was the only place she could still feel him moving past, like wind, but grief also sharpened into resolve. Megan began speaking publicly about the new legislation being drafted in California, bills designed to hold tech companies accountable when their platforms were used for child exploitation. She met with lawmakers, testified before committees, even traveled to Sacramento to share Chad's story in person. "If you build a house with open doors, don't be surprised when monsters walk in," she told them. Her words ended up quoted in national editorials, pushing the conversation beyond her own tragedy. The proposed law, later called the Amelia Act, required social media platforms to cooperate more quickly with law enforcement on threats involving minors and to invest in stronger content moderation. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. When the bill finally passed, Megan stood on the steps of the state capitol with Alex beside her, clutching a small framed photo of Chad. She didn't cry this time. She only whispered, "You mattered, sweetheart. You really mattered." The years blurred after that. Seasons changed, faces aged, and the internet only grew louder. But in quiet corners, the impact of one boy's story lingered. Schools across California added digital safety workshops to their curriculums. Counselors were trained to recognize signs of online coercion. Some of Chad's classmates, now adults, admitted that his death had saved them from dangerous paths. "I was talking to someone online back then," one girl confessed to a reporter years later. "After what happened to Chad, I blocked him. I think about that every day." Meanwhile, Project Sunset continued to uncover rings of exploitation stretching far beyond California. Agents in other states credited the original Amelia investigation with exposing international trafficking networks using encrypted servers. Each takedown carried Chad's case number as a reference, a quiet tribute within the system. But for Megan, the world remained split into two halves, before and after. She took up photography, the dream her son once had. Her pictures were simple sunsets over the freeway, children's shoes lined by the beach, the way morning light hit her kitchen sink. She said it helped her see through his eyes again. He saw beauty even in broken things, she would remind herself, quoting his handwriting from that old storyboard, every anniversary of his death. Alex and a few friends gathered at the skate park where they used to hang out. They'd light candles, play Chad's favorite songs, and tell stories. One year, they scattered flower petals from their boards, letting the wind carry them down the halfpipe. Someone filmed it, uploaded it, and thousands of strangers left comments filled with hearts and condolences. Megan watched the video once. Then she closed her laptop and let the silence return. By 2023, the story had faded from mainstream headlines, replaced by newer tragedies. But for those who remembered, it remained a parable about the cost of connection in the digital age. In classrooms, teachers told Chad's story without needing to explain his name. Students nodded, they'd heard it before, in whispers, in warning, Late one night, Megan received an email from an FBI agent who'd worked on Project Sunset. "Thought you'd want to know," it read. "We just shut down another hub. Thousands of kids rescued. Your son started this." She sat for a long time staring at the screen. Then she turned off the light, whispered goodnight to the empty room, and let herself sleep for the first time in years without the weight of unfinished questions. By the 5th year after Chad's death, time had become something elastic for Megan Amelia. It stretched and folded on itself, days vanishing like smoke and then reappearing as vivid fragments: the smell of his shampoo, the squeak of his skateboard wheels on concrete, the shape of his handwriting. Some mornings she would still wake expecting to hear him in the kitchen, humming tunelessly as he poured cereal. The silence that followed always landed like a physical blow. The Amelia Act had officially gone into effect that January. For the first time, social media companies faced real legal pressure to protect minors from online exploitation. Within months, thousands of suspect accounts were reported to law enforcement, and chat applications began implementing stronger age verification systems. In press conferences, politicians spoke of digital accountability. In smaller circles, activists called it what it was: Chad's Law. Megan attended the signing ceremony quietly, standing behind the governor with a hand over her heart. She didn't speak to cameras. She just smiled faintly when the pen scratched across the parchment and whispered, "This is for you, baby." That night she drove home through the city lights, the same stretch of freeway that had once taken him away from her. This time she didn't stop on the shoulder. She rolled down her window, let the wind whip through her hair, and felt for the first time not grief, but release. Meanwhile, Alex had begun work on a longer film, The Sky Beneath the Screen. It told Chad's story through poetic fragments rather than recreating the crime. The protagonist was a boy who believed that every screen was a window to heaven. The film ended with him stepping through one, his face lit not by a phone, but by sunlight. The production was small, shot on borrowed cameras and edited on an aging laptop, but it carried a heartbeat. When it premiered at a Los Angeles independent film festival, the audience rose in silence. Afterward, an older critic wrote, "Some stories are too cruel to relive, but this one teaches you how to survive." Alex sent Megan a copy on a USB drive with a note, "For the dream that started in your house." She watched it alone one Sunday afternoon, lights streaming across the living room floor. When the credits rolled and Chad's name appeared under inspiration, she whispered, "He finally made his film." The world was changing faster than anyone could track. Artificial intelligence had begun policing the internet, scanning images, analyzing language patterns to flag grooming behavior before it could escalate. Some of the algorithms used datasets derived from Project Sunset, meaning, in an indirect way, Chad's case helped train the machines designed to prevent the next tragedy. His story had become part of the architecture of protection, woven invisibly into code. For Megan, though, the truest legacy was quieter. It lived in conversations she had with parents after community meetings. They would linger, clutching their phones, asking how to talk to their teenagers without sounding intrusive. "Just listen," she'd tell them. "If they're scared, don't ask why first. Ask how you can help." On the 5th anniversary of his death, a candlelight vigil was held in Griffith Park. The evening was unseasonably warm, and the city skyline flickered in the distance like static. Dozens of people showed up: friends, teachers, police officers, even strangers who had learned his name through the documentary. They carried candles in mason jars and pictures of Chad smiling in his beanie, a hint of mischief in his eyes. Megan spoke only a few words. He thought one person couldn't make a difference. Turns out he did. Then she lifted her candle, and the crowd followed. Their lights reflected in 1,000 small screens raised to record the moment. Later that night, after everyone had gone, Megan remained under the trees. The park lights glowed like tiny constellations. She thought of how he used to say that cities at night looked like galaxies upside down. She smiled at the memory and whispered, "You were right, sweetheart. You're part of the stars now." The following year, a foundation was launched in his name, the Chad Amelia Digital Hope Initiative, offering counseling, scholarships, and legal assistance for victims of online exploitation. Its logo was simple: a small film camera within a heart, framed by a digital pixel glow. Megan didn't run it. She didn't need to. A group of volunteers, many survivors themselves, carried it forward. But she attended every opening event, standing quietly in the back, proud of what her son's pain had built. By then, the internet had begun to remember differently. Where once the search results for his name were filled with headlines about his death, now they were about prevention programs, reform, and healing. Algorithms that once buried the stories of victims were learning to amplify their voices. Chad's name had become a shield instead of a scar. Still, late at night, Megan would sit on the porch with her old laptop and scroll through his messages. She'd open their last conversation, the one where he texted, "Don't worry, Mom, I can handle it," she would whisper into the glow. "You don't have to handle it anymore." Then she'd close the screen and look at the real stars, steady and silent, knowing somewhere in that infinite sprawl was a piece of him. Alex visited her often. Sometimes they talked about making another film together, one about healing, not loss. Other times they just sat in silence, listening to the hum of the city. On one of those evenings, he told her that streaming platforms were negotiating to host The Sky Beneath the Screen. "If they pick it up," he said, "it'll reach millions." She smiled. "Then millions will meet him," she said softly. The premiere happened 6 months later. Megan sat in the front row, surrounded by crew members and families who had lost their own children to similar fates. The lights dimmed, and as the opening scene played, a teenage boy standing by the ocean, camera in hand, she felt her breath catch. The dialogue was lifted directly from Chad's notebook, "Find beauty even in broken things." When the film ended, the crowd rose in applause. Some cried, others simply stood in silence. Alex turned to her, tears glistening, and whispered, "He's free now." She nodded. "Yes," she said, voice trembling but sure, "and so are we." Months later, Megan moved to a smaller apartment near the coast. Every morning she walked the beach, collecting seashells, photographing the tide. She no longer counted anniversaries. She no longer measured time by loss. Instead, she lived by the rhythm of the waves coming and going, breaking and healing, forever in motion. One evening, as the sun dipped into the horizon, she saw a group of teenagers laughing near the water, phones raised to film the sunset. For a moment, she imagined Chad among them, barefoot, wine-tossed, camera in hand. She smiled. "You found your light," she whispered. And in that golden hour, it no longer felt like a goodbye story. It felt like a continuation. His name no longer echoed with sorrow but with purpose, threaded through laws, films, classrooms, and the quiet choices of people who decided to look a little closer, listen a little sooner, love a little harder, because of one boy who believed that broken things could still be beautiful.